This episode of the Good Living Now podcast is sponsored by Joy. Now, if you're someone who suffers with erectile dysfunction like I did after going through prostate cancer, get you some Joy Mode. Now, what I love most about Joy Mode is that it's all natural without the side effects found in some prescription medications. Plus, Joy Mode helps with heart health and blood pressure, so it's all good. Now, for more information, visit usejoymode.com. All right, go ahead, get your Joy Mode. This is the Good Living Now podcast, where we talk to real people about real change leading to real health. I'm your host, Harold LaFall, and today, well, it's just me. And I wanted to talk today because I posted a Facebook memory that came up, and you can see it right here. And I look like a police officer. Well, I was actually playing a police officer on the set of the Have and Have Nots. So I was at the Tyler Perry studio. And I remember when I posted this picture, I remember all my friends and family, they were so excited. They thought I had arrived. Well, what they didn't know is that I was in a time in my life of deep struggle. So much so that I was hiding from the repo man. And I remember during that time, my son was in middle school. And I remember, worried about how was I going to be able to make sure he had something to eat, make sure he had food for lunch and for dinner. And so there were times when I would just get a little can of peanut butter and eat that all day. And so I remember people praising me and not even knowing, what I was going through. And then just as my life was starting to turn around and things were starting to get better, I got the diagnosis of cancer. And what I know now is that diagnosis wasn't just about all the toxic food that I was eating. And for over 40 years, I was eating a whole bunch of toxic food. I used to love some meat and cheese and dairy, all of that was my jam. But what I know is that diagnosis wasn't just about what I was eating, but it was about all the stress that I had been under for decades. You see, I grew up in a family situation where we didn't talk about what we were going through. And I grew up with a lot of trauma. Growing up, I remember one time I was asleep and I was awakened to my mother screaming. And my dad was beating my mother. And I was about 7 or 8 at the time. And I remember putting the pillow over my head to try to mute the sounds because I was crying because I heard my mother screaming. And I didn't hear my dad say anything, but I just heard my mom screaming. And the next day I woke up getting ready to go to school. My mom has a black eye. Nobody says anything, and I just go to school as normal. But I remember it was at that point that I just started to feel unsafe, and I started to feel scared because if you don't feel safe at home, where, how do you show up in the world? And I remember thinking that, well, we're not going to say nothing? And then my dad beat my mom again, and then again. And I learned to suppress, my feelings. And I learned just to live with being afraid all the time. And so for me, that cancer diagnosis wasn't just about the food that I was eating. It was about all of that trauma and all of that stress that I had normalized. You see, a lot of times we see people and they look okay. I looked okay in that picture, at the Tyler Perry studio, but I was dealing with so much stress and trauma. I'd wake up in the morning just stressed out, go to sleep stressed and worried. And when they say stress kills, it's not just about people getting heart attacks or having strokes. What stress does is it weakens our immune system, and it makes us susceptible to all kinds of diseases, including cancer. So when I started my healing journey after getting that diagnosis, not only did I have to change what I was eating, because here's what I know. Everything we put in our mouth is either fighting disease or feeding it. for decades, I was feeding disease. And I know to get healthier, I knew I was going to have to start, not feeding disease. But I started changing little by little. A lot of times you know, we get a diagnosis and we want to change and we want to just do it overnight. But if you've been eating a certain type of way for 40 years, change is going to take some time. And for me, I started realizing the truth that food can be the most powerful form of medicine or the slowest form of poison. And I had to stop poisoning my body if I was going to become cancer free. So I started to look up information on how the body heals. And I was surprised to find that at the time I had three doctors. I had a primary physician, a urologist, and an oncologist. None of those three doctors talked to me about nutrition or making any lifestyle changes. It was only after doing my own research that I learned that there was a correlation between prostate cancer, which I had, and meat and dairy. And those were staples in my diet. Back then I was trying to do the whole low carb thing. So I was eating lots of meat and lots of cheese, trying to stay lean, not realizing I was poisoning my body. And so as I started getting more information and doing more research and realizing that, wait a minute, all this stuff is toxic to my body. And another thing that I used to consume all the time was, I used to hate drinking water. So I would add the little Crystal Light. I used to love the lemon type. I would add that to my water. Well, I didn't know that it had these toxic dyes in those Crystal Light packages that are actually banned in other countries. And here I am unknowingly poisoning my body. Now, I knew that the meat and cheese, just generally speaking, wasn't probably good for me because, we know that it causes inflammation and all those types of things. But I didn't know about the Crystal Light. And I also used to drink a lot of diet sodas. Again, trying to stay lean, that stuff ain't healthy. And I didn't know that. And so once I started getting new information, slowly, I started making changes. I started eliminating certain things from my diet. First, I never really ate pork because my idea when I was growing up, I thought if you didn't eat pork, you was healthy. Well, that's a lie. And then, so pork wasn't an issue, but I cut out beef, and then I cut out cheese. No, I didn't cut out cheese. I cut out beef, then I cut out chicken. Dairy really was the most difficult thing for me to cut out, was the dairy, because I could eat a pint of ice cream in one setting, and I would put cheese on everything. But as I started to cut those things out, I started replacing those things with healthier substitutes. So I started juicing. And that's something, growing up, I never ate a lot of fruits and vegetables. And when I say never ate a lot, I really never ate any. We didn't have fruits and vegetables. I didn't have a salad until I was an adult. And even when I had that salad, it was full of all kinds of stuff that shouldn't have been on there. So I started eliminating those foods out of my diet, replacing it with juicing. In the meantime, my doctors were telling me that, I needed to have this surgery. And they were pushing me to have this surgery to see if it would stop the cancer. And because I didn't know better, I listened to what they said. Now, they were saying there was no guarantee that this surgery would work. The way they said it was, let's see if it will work. So I ended up doing that surgery. But while I was doing that surgery, I ended up making all these changes to my diet. And after the surgery, I had every imaginable side effect you can think of. I had erectile dysfunction. I had incontinence. And I was in excruciating pain. Pain so much so that I would go into my bathroom, close the door, and put a towel underneath so my son couldn't hear me screaming because I was in so much pain. And I felt like my body had betrayed me. And the doctors, they were ready to give me all kinds of prescription medications for the pain, for the erectile dysfunction, for the incontinence. But I knew that that was putting me on a pathway of not health and healing, but a dependence on drugs. And having to deal with all the side effects that came along with those drugs. And so I refused to take any of those drugs that they offered. And what happened was I ended up having to start wearing Depends. And let me tell you, wearing Depends, that was the most humbling, humiliating experience I ever had. Here I was, at the time I was 48, having to go to the store to buy Depends was really, really tough. But I needed them because my body was doing whatever it was doing. And I remember though, I got the Depends that had, a little color to them. I didn't want the little plain white ones. I had to be, I had to be a little fancy. So I got me some nicer ones just in case somebody saw, in case I raised my hand or something and somebody saw my Depends. I didn't want them to see the little white pamper looking thing. And so I started making changes. And one of the things that I discovered was change not only was hard for me, it was especially hard for my family. During the times we'd have family gatherings, folks want you to eat what they cook, but I'm on a healing journey. I can't eat that anymore. I can't eat the macaroni and cheese. And family members got offended when I wouldn't eat their food. And so what I would do is I would bring the stuff that I could eat that was a part of my healing journey, because one of the things that I realized is that nobody is on this journey but me. And if I'm going to heal, I have to be committed to my own healing. And so I noticed as I started to do all of those things, eliminating all those things that were toxic, replacing them with juice, and I started taking supplements. I met an herbalist that told me about black seed oil. I had never heard of that before. And what she told me, it was something that she recommended to her clients who were going through cancer, because the black seed oil was said to kill cancer cells. So I started taking that. I started taking sea moss. I started fueling my body with all these nutrients. And my healing didn't come overnight. It was actually probably about a year before I started to see changes. And I think a lot of times, we want healing to happen overnight. But if you've been fueling your body with toxins for 40 years, it's going to be a journey to help your body remove those toxins. And so I kept doing all of the things, not knowing if any of it was really working, because I still was dealing with the erectile dysfunction, incontinence, and all of the pain. And I remember one day I woke up and my Depends was dry. I was like, wait a minute, what's going on? And so that was the day, that was the first sign that my body was healing, because the incontinence stopped. And shortly thereafter, the erectile dysfunction was no longer there. They started working again. I was like, okay. And then the pain had subsided. And my doctors, they were all surprised as to, what happened, what's going on. And they didn't ask me what happened. They just told me to keep on doing what I was doing. They never asked me, what I had done. And so here we are now, 10 years later. It would be October 5th, 2015 is when I was diagnosed with cancer. So this August will make 10 years. And so I've been cancer-free for 9 years. And what I know to be true is that change is possible. Healing is possible. But we have to be willing to do the work and make the changes necessary so that the body can do what it's designed to do, and that is to heal. We can't keep fueling our bodies with the same stuff thinking that it's going to help us heal our bodies. We have to change. Nothing changes until we change. And I know it's so hard to hear, but until we make the changes necessary, we'll keep having the same results. And for me, this journey has really taught me how truly impossible not only having healthy foods are to our healing journey, but make sure that we're managing our stress. And part of managing my stress was I had to get some therapy because your friends can't help you out. They dealing with their own stuff. The church, they're not qualified to give you the type of tools you need to really deal with the stress and the trauma that we are all go through at some point in our lives. And so for me, it was about changing the way I ate, but also getting therapy so that I was no longer, dealing with chronic stress, waking up worried and going to sleep worried. And so what I know now is that stress that we've normalized is because we feel like we have something to prove, defend, or protect. A lot of us don't know, just as we are enough. And that was one of the things that I used to put these little yellow stickums on my window, on my mirror in my bathroom, and I would say I'm enough. And just to affirm that, because sometimes when you're going through what you're going through, you forget that you're enough. And I had to remind myself of that. And that's one of the things that I got out of therapy, was knowing that just as I am enough. And so I want to encourage you. You might be going through a physical challenge, a health challenge. You might be going through a financial challenge. But I want you to know that you have never not made it. You'll get through whatever you're going through. But you got to remind yourself that you're enough just as you are. So that's all I wanted to say. I hope that something I said reminded you that even in spite all that you're going through, if you're not dead, you're not done. That's what I heard somebody once say. If you're not dead, you're not doomed. You're not done. And like my grandmother used to say, in spite of everything you're going on, you just got to keep on keeping on, because trouble can't last always. All right. I'll see you on the next episode.